This is the fourth episode of the Are You Done series, and today we will be covering the administration of the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. The agenda of this series is simple and straightforward. The series isn't about what you know, it is about what you think you know. It will check the depth of your preparation and help you rebrush the basics and give you the necessary confidence to ace this topic. Let's begin. The video is structured in a manner that there are a set of questions that you should be able to answer alongside the video. The medieval Indian state organized around land, that is territory, or revenue rights, that is assignment. As soon as the words territory and assignment come along, you must know that assignment or revenue rights is related to Delhi Sultanate versus territory as a fixed concept is related to Mughals. Territory as a concept for the Mughals basically means that it is divided into a more or less three-tiered structure. We have the Subah, beneath that we have the Sarkar, we have the Pargana, and at the absolute bottom we have the Gramas. The Subah is equivalent to a modern day state. Similarly, the Sarkar is equivalent to a modern day district. And Pargana is equivalent to a cluster of villages. Gramas are your villages. All the territories under the Mughal Empire are standardized. And they were standardized under Akbar. Versus the assignment under Delhi Sultanate is called an Iqta. What is an Iqta? It is basically land revenue rights granted to military officers or nobles. These nobles are called Iqtadars. They are also alternatively called Muktis. In exchange for what? In exchange for administrative service and for maintaining troops. This answers whether the Indian state in the medieval times was organized around land, should make you think of Mughals, or revenue rights, should make you think of Delhi Sultanate. Next, what is the highest territorial unit for the Sultanate and for the Mughals? For the Sultanate, it is the Iqta, headed by who? Iqtadar or Mukti. We have just done this. The Iqta varies in size. It is a non-uniform province under Delhi Sultanate. Versus for Mughals, it is the Subah. And your Subah is a fixed provincial unit. Non-uniform, fixed. How does the hierarchy cascade down in Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire? Very simply, we have the Iqta, we have the Sheikh, We have the Pargana, which is common to both of these, and we have the village, which is again common to both of these. Pargana in the Mughal Empire is also called a Mahal. Let's quickly discuss this so we never falter on this again. The Iqta is a primary administrative division, which is basically a non-standardized Mughal Subah. It is assigned to nobles as Iqta. It is governed by a Mukti, right? Or an Iqtadar, or a Wali. These keywords are important because keywords, as we have already established, are often asked by UPSC. This person, the Iqtadar rather, he combines the revenue plus military responsibilities. And Iqtas are transferable, which basically means they are non-hereditary in nature. Why are they transferable? To prevent consolidation of power. The Sheikh, on the other hand, is headed by somebody called the Sheikhdar. The Sheikhdar is responsible for maintaining law and order and for military control. The Sheikh on this level works alongside somebody called the Amil. This is a PYQ. This keyword has been asked as it is. What is an Amil? It is a revenue officer. Which is why what taxes are called in a particular empire or sultanate or dynasty becomes important. Revenue officers always become important. And of course, the administrative hierarchy of every such empire and dynasty becomes important and must be revised. The Pargana is the core revenue unit. I'm going to write this down here because this is also hyper important. What is it? It is a core or a basic revenue unit. It is headed by a Munsif. The person who is responsible for maintaining the revenue records is called a Kanango. Who is he? He is a record keeper. And the local intermediary at the Pargana level is called a Chaudhary. This guy also helps in assessment and collection of revenue, land revenue. Lastly, of course, we have the village, which is the lowest unit. It is semi-autonomous in nature, and the village is governed by somebody called the Muqaddam. So this happens to be the village headman. At the village level as well, there is somebody required to maintain land records about who owns what plot of land and the characteristics of land. The basics of that is headed by somebody called the Patwari. So on the village level then, we have somebody called the Muqaddam, which is the headman, and we have the Patwari, who maintains the land records. At the Pargana level, which is the core revenue unit, we have somebody who's called the Munsif, who heads it. He is assisted by somebody called the Konango, who maintains the records, the revenue records. The local intermediary at the Pargana level is called the Chaudhary, and he also helps in the assessment and collection of land revenue. We then come to the Mughal Empire. We have already established this hierarchy. Highest territorial unit, intermediate territorial unit, basic fiscal unit. Same for this, right? Same for the Sultanate. This was your core territorial unit. This is your basic fiscal unit. And then we have the village or the gram. Now the Subah is headed by somebody called the Subahdar. Functions include executive plus military. For the Sarkar, we have two key appointments. We have somebody called the Faujdar. As the name suggests, he maintains law and order plus military functions. And two, we have somebody called the Amil. Again, responsible for what? Same for here, right? We have Amil in the Delhi Sultanate. We have Amil in the Mughal Empire. This Amil is also called Amal Guzar, responsible for revenue, of course. At the Pargana level, we have somebody called the Iqtadar, which is again responsible for your law and order. We have the Amil or the Munsif for revenue, and we have the Kanango for record keeping. So what this goes on to establish for us is basically that there are a lot of similarities and overlaps between the Delhi Sultanate and the Mughal Empire. But there are also a significant number of divergences. Basically, the Mughal Empire happens to be much more coordinated in terms of dissecting the administrative setup. The Delhi Sultanate was still evolving at that point and is not as coordinated. The SOPs are basically not set. Now we come to the next question. Who heads the province? And are the powers separated? If UPSC asks just one conceptual difference, it is between fusion versus separation of powers. Fusion and separation of powers between executive and revenue authority. So basically for the Sultanate, we have the Mukti or the Wali, right? Which shows us fusion. Fusion, why? Because they had the civil, military and revenue powers, basically making them super powerful in their own domains. Versus in the Mughal Empire, we had the Subahdar, which had executive and military functions, and we also had somebody called the Diwan. This is of course happening at the Subah level, right? We've already done the rest of the levels in detail, and that should give you a basic idea of how it is to be done. But at the Subah level, we had somebody called the Subahdar, which had the executive and military functions, and we had somebody called the Diwan, which had the revenue functions. What does this show us? What does this show us? This shows us in the Delhi Sultanate we had something called the fusion of powers, versus for Mughal Empire what we see is dual control. Seen through this, seen through this. How is revenue collected? And who audits it? At the Sultanate level, we have somebody, as we have already discussed, Amil, who collects the revenue. And who checks the Amil? Who audits the Amil? The Amil is audited by somebody called Diwan-e-Wizarat. This particular institutional setup was tightened under Alauddin Khilji. At the Mughal level, the Diwan is more or less independent. And he is assisted by, so this is Subah level, right? This is the Subah level. He is assisted by somebody called the Kanango at the Pargana level, and somebody called the Patwari at the village level or the Gram level. The Gram is headed by what? Just to revise, the Muqaddam. And this, my dear friends, is how this has to be done. Before moving forward, however, something that needs to be borne in mind is how is revenue assessed, especially in the Mughal Empire. There's of course a lot of differentiation in this regard, which is why we must get into the nitty-gritties of it. We had 4 basic systems. We had the Zabt system, which is also called the Dhasala system. This was where the average produce and prices over the last 10 years were calculated to fix revenue, primarily in cash. This was done in cash, and this was done per crop. Then we had something called the Batai. Batai comes from the word Batna, of course, in Hindi. And this was also called Ghala Bakshi. This system predominantly concentrated on crop sharing. The state shared the actual crop with the peasant at the threshing floor. This is how this got done. There are 2 more systems that we need to talk about. There is something called the Kankut or the Dana Bandi, which is basically estimation. So the government established the potential yield per bigha of standing crops. What is a bigha? It is a unit of measurement of land. Unit of measurement of land. There is of course a PYQ on units of measurement of land. There was something called drone in one of the PYQs. And lastly, we have something called the Nask. What is a Nask? It is basically appraisement. Appraisement of what? It was a simplified, less rigorous assessment method, often based on previous year's demand, requiring less detailed survey. The next question asks us about what links administration to the military. How are officials paid and how are troops maintained? In the Sultanate, we had the Iqta, of course. Iqta headed by somebody called the Iqtadar, and this Iqta was given to this Iqtadar in lieu of maintenance of troops. Iqtas were, of course, as we have established, transferable, non-hereditary. On the Mughal side, we had something called the Mansabdari Jagirdari system. Jagirs were transferable. Again, why were they transferable? So that consolidation of power never happened. The Jagirs were split into two things. The Jagir was calculated according to the Zat, which is your rank, and Savar, that is the number of troops you maintained. Next, we have something about how does the center control provincial elites. In the Sultanate, this worked through the concept of transfers. Iqtas were transferable, and audits. The effectiveness of this control varied significantly according to the geography in the Sultanate. In the Mughals, this was maintained through constant transfers of Jagirs, rotation of Jagirdars, and by something called the Vakia Navis. This was the intelligence department of the Mughal Empire. And of course, then there was also, as a second tier, the Diwan was checked by Subahdar. So we had two mechanisms working here, more or less one mechanism working here. How deep is bureaucratic specialization? Are the functions compartmentalized? The Sultanate maintained limited specialization, as we have already established. A lot of the officials and administrative dignitaries had overlapping roles. Versus for the Mughals, more or less in comparison to Delhi Sultanate, they had a higher degree of specialization. How do we know this? Because they had distinct departments and offices and officials, of course. What is the nature of the assignment? Is it hereditary or not? For the Sultanate, more or less, these things were non-hereditary in nature, at least in theory. But as the Sultanate moved on and time progressed, we could see a hereditary drift happening. So basically, these things that were supposed to be non-hereditary turned out to be hereditary in the longer run. There was an inclination and bent towards generation after generation of Iqtadars becoming Iqtadars. Versus in the Mughals, this was non-hereditary. There were frequent transfers, more frequent than in the Sultanate period. And there was tighter rotation. At the village level, was the extraction of revenue, direct or mediated. For both of them, it was indirect control. The empires were so large that, of course, the king or the emperor or the sultan could not directly go and extract revenue. This should be common knowledge. The intermediaries network had to be spread in the villages so as to ensure that revenue was duly collected and deposited with the royal treasury. Intermediaries like Muqaddam, intermediaries like Chaudhary, and of course, panchayats existed for dispute resolution. These two were, of course, assisted by somebody called the Patwari. Yes, at the village level. Lastly, I have a set of few questions for you. The Diwan Subadar control existed in the Delhi Sultanate. This is, of course, false, because this was a feature of the Mughal Empire. The Iqta and Jagir both confer land ownership. Incorrect. Just revenue assignment, not ownership. Mahal is a village level unit in Delhi Sultanate. This is again incorrect. This was true for the Mughal Empire, and this is coterminous to Pargana. Nothing to do with the village level whatsoever. The assignments were strictly non-hereditary in practice in both systems. This is, of course, false, as we have already established. Village institutions were dismantled under both regimes. This question is a farce. Village systems have always and shall continue to be the bedrock of the Indian administrative setup. Now we have a couple of PYQs for you to solve and learn from. With reference to Mughal India, what is the differences between Jagirdar and Zamindar? Jagirdars were holders of land assignments in lieu of judicial and police duties, whereas Zamindars were holders of revenue rights without obligation to perform any other duty other than revenue collection. Of course, it's false. Land assignments to Jagirdars were hereditary and revenue rights of Zamindars were not hereditary. This is obviously false. The statement has basically been made opposite of one another. The Jagirdars had it being non-hereditary for them. The Zamindars were hereditary landowners. Neither one nor two. Consider the following statements. In the revenue administration of Delhi Sultanate, the in charge of revenue collection was known as Amil. This is correct. The Iqta system of Delhi Sultans was an ancient indigenous institution. That is obviously incorrect. This was brought from Persia. The office of Mir Bakshi came into existence during the reign of Khalji Sultans of Delhi. That is incorrect. Mir Bakshi as an institution existed under the Mughals, not under them. Although Alauddin Khilji did bring about a series of reforms, this was not one of them. Only one becomes correct. With reference to medieval India, which one of the following is the correct sequence in ascending order in terms of size? You should be able to answer this, of course, but Pargana is supposed to be a cluster of villages. The more you revise, the better you will be at the game. Sarkar is a district. Subah is a modern state. This is how we began the video. And with this, we have culminated this exercise. I'll see you in the next episode of the Are You Done series. Until then, keep revising, keep questioning, and don't move on until you are actually done. Thank you.